Clara set the last box down on the worn wooden floor of the old house, her arms aching from the weight of so many belongings. A puff of dust rose into the air, catching the fading sunlight that streamed through the tall, curtainless windows. She rubbed the back of her neck and gazed around the parlor. The house was a time capsule, frozen in an era when lace doilies and heavy velvet drapes were fashionable. It felt heavy, as if the walls themselves held onto secrets too old to tell. This was her inheritance, her grandmother's crumbling Victorian house, perched on the edge of a sleepy town, and the peculiar collection of porcelain dolls that filled nearly every room. Clara had avoided coming here for years, ever since her childhood visits left her with nightmares. Her grandmother had always been kind, but her obsession with those dolls had unnerved Clara from the start. The dolls were everywhere. Some sat on narrow wooden shelves, their painted eyes gazing blankly into the distance. Others were arranged in rocking chairs or propped up on antique chests. Many were elaborately dressed in frilly gowns, their porcelain faces framed by ringlets or ribbons. Clara suppressed a shudder. Even now, as an adult, the sight of them filled her with an inexplicable unease. Her grandmother had named every doll. Clara remembered sitting in the parlor as a child, squirming on the floral-patterned sofa while her grandmother introduced them. "This one is Alice," she had said, cradling a doll with golden curls and a delicate blue satin dress. "She's a good listener, and this one is Margaret. She doesn't like to be touched." The memory made Clara's skin crawl. At the time, she had convinced herself it was all just eccentric nonsense. But now, standing in the same room years later, she wasn't so sure. The will had been explicit. The dolls were to remain in the house. Clara couldn't sell them, nor could she throw them away. It was a strange request, but one her grandmother had seemed adamant about. Now, as the new owner of the house, Clara had no choice but to live with them. As evening fell, Clara decided to explore the house. She wandered through its dimly lit halls, her footsteps echoing on the creaking floorboards. The rooms were exactly as she remembered them. The library with its dusty tomes, the dining room with its long table and mismatched chairs, the kitchen with its old-fashioned stove. But it was the collection room that drew her attention most. Located at the end of a narrow hallway, the collection room was where her grandmother had kept her most prized dolls. Clara hesitated before opening the door. When she finally stepped inside, a chill ran down her spine. The room was lined with glass cabinets, each one filled with rows of porcelain faces. Their eyes seemed to follow her as she moved, their expressions unnervingly lifelike. Clara scanned the shelves, her gaze lingering on a single doll that she didn't recognize. It was smaller than the others, with jet black hair and a white lace dress. Unlike the others, it wasn't displayed in a cabinet, but sat alone on a high shelf, tilted slightly as if it had been placed there carelessly. Something about the doll made Clara's stomach churn. She told herself it was just a trick of the light, the way its shadow fell on the wall behind it. But as she turned to leave, she could have sworn she heard a faint sound, a whisper. "Clara!" Her blood turned to ice. She froze, straining to hear over the pounding of her own heart. The sound was so soft, she almost thought she'd imagined it. Almost. "Clara." It was unmistakable this time. The voice was faint, like someone speaking from far away. It seemed to come from the direction of the doll. Clara's rational mind screamed at her to leave the room, to lock the door, and never come back. But something stronger, curiosity, or perhaps fear, kept her rooted to the spot. She approached the shelf slowly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The doll's painted eyes seemed to glint in the dim light. Tentatively, she reached out a hand and touched its cold porcelain face. "Clara!" The whisper was louder now, clearer. Clara's hand jerked back as if she'd been burned. She stumbled a step backward, her heart hammering in her chest. The room felt suddenly colder, the air thick with an oppressive weight. She scanned the shelves, half expecting the other dolls to move or blink, but they remained still, their vacant stares unwavering. Clara backed out of the room and closed the door with trembling hands. She leaned against it, trying to steady her breathing. "It's just stress," she told herself. The long drive, the unpacking, the memories. It was all getting to her. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Back in the guest bedroom, Clara tried to focus on something else. She unpacked her clothes, arranged her toiletries, and set her laptop on the small desk by the window. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, the whispering voice echoed in her mind. That night, as she lay in bed, the house seemed to come alive. The floorboards creaked, the wind howled through the eaves, and the old pipes groaned. Clara told herself it was normal for a house this old to make noises. But then, just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it again. "Clara!" Her eyes snapped open. The voice was faint but distinct, as if someone were standing just outside her door. She sat up, clutching the blankets to her chest. The darkness seemed to press in around her, heavy and suffocating. Summoning all her courage, she got out of bed and crept to the door. The hallway was empty, its shadows stretching long and deep. But the whispering continued, drawing her toward the collection room. Clara hesitated, her hand trembling on the doorknob. She didn't want to go back in there, but she couldn't ignore the voice. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The room was just as she had left it, the dolls sitting silently in their glass cabinets. But the small doll with the black hair was no longer on the high shelf. It was sitting on the floor, tilted slightly to one side, its blank eyes staring up at her. Clara's heart raced as she knelt down to pick it up. As her fingers brushed its cold surface, the whisper came again, louder this time. "Clara, you have to listen." Her breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back, dropping the doll. It hit the floor with a hollow thud but didn't break. The room seemed to close in around her, the air heavy with an almost tangible presence. Clara backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind her. She pressed her back against it, her mind racing. What was happening? Was she losing her grip on reality, or was there something in this house, something tied to those dolls? One thing was certain. She wasn't going to get any sleep that night. Clara woke the next morning feeling as though she hadn't slept at all. The events of the previous night played over and over in her mind, each detail more vivid and unsettling in the harsh light of day. She tried to convince herself that she had imagined it all, that her exhaustion was manifesting in strange ways. But the memory of the doll's whisper still lingered, sending chills down her spine. Determined to distract herself, Clara threw herself into cleaning the house. She scrubbed the kitchen counters, dusted the shelves, and vacuumed the faded rugs. But no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she passed the collection room, she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, as though dozens of tiny eyes were following her every move. By midday, the oppressive atmosphere had grown too much to bear. Clara decided to get some fresh air and explore the small town she now called home. As she walked down the quiet streets, she found herself drawn to a small antique shop with a faded sign that read, "Whispering Relics." The name sent a shiver through her, but curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped inside. The shop was cluttered with old furniture, vintage trinkets, and other curiosities. An elderly man with a stooped back and piercing blue eyes greeted her from behind the counter. "New in town?" he asked, his voice raspy but warm. Clara nodded. "I inherited my grandmother's house. Just trying to get settled in." The man's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Your grandmother, she lived in the old Victorian on the hill, didn't she? The one with the dolls." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Yes. How did you know? The man let out a heavy sigh. That house has a reputation. Folks around here say it's unusual. Your grandmother was a kind woman, but those dolls of hers, people say they're cursed. Clara's stomach twisted. Cursed? What do you mean? The man hesitated, then leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Those dolls, they've been in your family for generations. Passed down from mother to daughter. There are stories about them. Stories that, well, let's just say they're not the kind of thing you'd want to believe. Clara pressed him for more, but he shook his head. If you're smart, you'll leave that house. Leave those dolls. Some things are better left alone. Shaken, Clara left the shop and returned home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. As she approached the house, she felt a chill run down her spine. The windows seemed darker, the air heavier. When she stepped inside, she found the collection room door ajar. She had closed it that morning. She was sure of it. Summoning her courage, Clara pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was exactly as she had left it, except for one thing. The small doll with the black hair was now sitting in the center of the floor facing the door. In its lap was a piece of yellowed paper, folded neatly. Clara hesitated, then picked up the paper and unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, scrawled in her grandmother's delicate script. The truth is in the whispers. Listen, but be careful. Not all voices are kind. Clara's hands trembled as she read the note. Her grandmother had known about the whispers. She had left her a warning. But what did it mean? What truth was she supposed to find? Before she could think any further, the room grew colder, the air sharp with a metallic tang. The dolls in the cabinet seemed to shift, their painted eyes glinting in the dim light. And then, all at once, the whispers began. Clara. 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 The sound came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It swirled around her, growing louder and more insistent. Clara's breath quickened as she turned in place, her eyes darting from one doll to the next. Were they moving? It was impossible to tell. The dim light and flickering shadows played tricks on her eyes, but she could swear that some of them had shifted ever so slightly. What do you want? Clara's voice trembled as she addressed the empty room. The whispers paused, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse. Then, a single voice spoke, clear and chilling. Find the box. Find the key. Unlock the truth. Clara stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The words made no sense, but the voice was so commanding, so full of authority, that she couldn't ignore it. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for some sign, some clue. And then she saw it. A small wooden box, tucked away on a high shelf. It was old and ornate, its surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift under the dim light. Driven by equal parts fear and curiosity, Clara dragged a chair to the shelf and retrieved the box. It was heavier than she expected, and the moment she touched it, a strange warmth spread through her fingers. She brought it down carefully and placed it on the floor in front of her. The whispers began again, softer this time, almost encouraging. Her hand shook as she opened the box. Inside was a key, its surface tarnished with age. Alongside it was a folded piece of parchment. Clara unfolded it and read the words, written in the same delicate script as the note, "The truth is buried deep. Trust only the whispers that guide you. But beware, they may not all speak the truth." Clara's mind raced. What was her grandmother trying to tell her? And why did she feel as though someone was watching her every move? A loud thud broke her thoughts. She turned sharply to see the small black-haired doll lying on its side, as if it had fallen. But it hadn't been anywhere near an edge. It was as if it had been pushed. Or had it moved on its own? The room's air grew heavier, colder. The whispers grew louder once more, overlapping, their tones urgent and discordant. Clara clutched the key tightly, her pulse racing. Something was coming. Something she couldn't see but could feel closing in around her. Her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind. Not all voices are kind. Clara stumbled to her feet, clutching the key in the box. She didn't know what the truth was, but one thing was clear. She was no longer safe in this house. She needed answers, and she needed them fast, before the whispers consumed her completely. Clara's hands trembled as she bolted the collection room door behind her. The whispers had grown louder, almost desperate, echoing through the house in a cacophony of unintelligible words. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she clutched the key in the small box, retreating to the guest bedroom where she felt marginally safer. But even there, the air felt wrong, charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. She placed the box on the bed, staring at it as if it might spring open on its own. The whispers were quieter here, but they still lingered, a faint susurrus that seemed to emanate from the walls. Clara unfolded the note again, her grandmother's words looping in her mind. Trust only the whispers that guide you. But beware, they may not all speak the truth. The key felt heavy in her hand, as though it were laden with the weight of whatever secrets it unlocked. Clara's gaze flicked toward the closet. Something about it drew her attention, a subtle pull that she couldn't explain. She approached it slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing rows of neatly hung clothes and a scattering of shoes on the floor. But at the back, half hidden by an old coat, was a small door she had never noticed before. It was low, barely reaching her knees, and painted the same color as the walls, blending in almost seamlessly. The key grew warmer in her hand, the whispers suddenly louder, more urgent. Clara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to leave it alone, to walk away and never look back. But the whispers, they wouldn't let her. They rose in pitch, a crescendo that clawed at her sanity until she could bear it no longer. With shaking hands, she knelt and inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a heavy click. The small door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. A cold draft wafted up, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. Clara swallowed hard, steeling herself as she grabbed the flashlight from her bedside table. The beam cut through the inky blackness, illuminating stone walls that dripped with moisture. Each step down felt like an eternity. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, resolving into fragmented sentences that made her skin crawl. The truth, hidden below. She didn't listen. Save yourself. At the bottom of the stairs, Clara found herself in a small circular chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with porcelain dolls. These were different from the ones upstairs, older, their faces cracked and stained. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and atop it was a single doll. It was larger than the others, its dress tattered and its eyes black as coal. In its lap was another note, written in the same delicate hand. This is where it ends. The whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing in on Clara like a physical weight. She approached the pedestal cautiously, her flashlight trembling in her grip. As she reached for the note, the doll's head turned sharply to face her. Clara screamed, stumbling back as the flashlight clattered to the ground. The beam flickered, casting wild shadows across the room. The doll remained still, its eyes locked on Clara, with an intensity that made her chest tighten. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the chamber with a cacophony of voices. Finish it. Set us free. End the curse. Clara's hands fumbled for the box. Inside, beneath the parchment, was a small knife with an ornate handle. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Not all voices are kind. The whispers seemed to fight each other now, some urging her forward, others warning her to run. "Break it!" one voice demanded. "Leave now!" another hissed. Clara's gaze fell on the doll. Its cracked face seemed almost human in the dim light, its coal-black eyes brimming with malice and sorrow. The knife in her hand felt impossibly heavy. Her heart raced as she raised it, unsure of what she was about to do. "Free us!" the voices begged. With a cry, Clara plunged the knife into the doll's chest. The room erupted in chaos. The shelves rattled, dolls toppling to the floor, as an unearthly wail filled the air. The doll on the pedestal cracked and crumbled, its pieces scattering like ash. Clara fell to her knees, covering her ears as the whispers turned into screams and then silence. When she opened her eyes, the room was empty. The shelves were bare, the pedestal gone. Clara was alone in the chamber, the knife still in her hand. The oppressive weight had lifted, replaced by an eerie stillness. She climbed the stairs in a daze, emerging into the house to find it bathed in morning light. The dolls were gone. Every last one. The house felt different, lighter, as though a shadow had been lifted. Clara stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air. She didn't know if the curse was truly broken or if she had simply traded one nightmare for another, but for the first time in years, she felt free. As she turned to lock the door behind her, a faint whisper brushed against her ear. "Thank you."